This is going to be like similar trials in the past, but probably kind of supercharged in a way because this case, again, has galvanized attention in a way that no prior case really ever had.
Jamiles Lartey is a staff writer for the Marshall Project, where he's been reporting on Derek Chauvin's previous history of violent policing. Jamiles, thank you so much for being on the show.
I appreciate you having me.
So let's talk about Derek Chauvin. All right, so he was a Minneapolis police officer for almost 20 years. First off, what exactly do we know about his record as an officer and his past incidents of violence?
Well, what we know is that Derek Chauvin was the subject of at least 22 complaints over his career as a Minneapolis Police Department. And we know only one of those incidents resulted in any discipline of any kind. What we also know through our reporting is that a number of folks who encountered Derek Chauvin as a police officer were taken down or arrested in sort of startlingly similar ways to the way that George Floyd was arrested, which, and by that I mean either grabbed by the neck or held down with force and pressure applied to the neck or the top of the back while prone on the ground.
Wow, that's horrible. Geez. And you spoke to some of the people that Chauvin had violently arrested. You know, I've read some of those articles. They're really excellent. But can you tell us a little bit more about, you know, those individuals and what they had to say about their encounters with him?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd start with the woman who was the first person we mentioned in our article, Zoya Code. She was arrested by Derek Chauvin after a domestic incident in her home. It was very emotional for her to talk about it. She just described it as, you know, this man, Zoya's maybe about 110 pounds soaking wet, how they, you know, arrested her in her own home, handcuffed her, how she wasn't fighting back or resisting in any way. They carried her out of her home while handcuffed, placed her on the ground. That's actually one of the things that came up in our reporting. In the police report, they'd said that they placed her on the grass. Zoya told us that she remembered very distinctly being placed on the concrete and how hard and how uncomfortable it was to be under Chauvin's knee with her upper body all pressed into the concrete. The Attorney General in their report, or in a report that detailed this arrest, were able to get a hold of the body camera footage, and it showed that in fact Zoya had been placed primarily on the concrete. But yeah, to go back to her account, you know, she just remembers not resisting, but just thinking, you know, they're going to kill me. Zoya knew Philando Castile, not really well, but she knew him. She'd known him from growing up in Minneapolis, and this was about a year after he had been killed in a Minneapolis suburb by a St. Anthony police officer. And she remembered, and you know, it really stuck with me, calling out, you know, don't kill me like you killed Cuz.
Jeez. So in all of these incidents, you know, what really stood out to you in these stories and in these interviews, you know, with these people who are speaking now for the first time about their experiences? You know, not just the consistency, but the fact that it's all with the same person. And, you know, I guess I'm just curious, when you're hearing this, because, you know, you're reporting on it, how do you sort of feel about that?
I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, first and foremost, it's always empathy, right? And being thankful that people are willing to revisit these painful memories and traumatic memories, and do so in the service of the general public, you know, understanding what happened. So I think that's the first thing that comes up for me personally. I think one of the other things that stood out is, you know, all of the people who we spoke to for this story had a number of interactions with police and law enforcement in their lives before. And yet they all sort of singled Derek Chauvin out as being uniquely gruff or abrasive or uncaring about their pain or discomfort. I think some people have an intuition that, oh, anyone who gets arrested is going to feel like the cop treated them badly because no one wants to get arrested. That may be true to some degree. But, I talked to some use of force experts while reporting this story, and I kind of mentioned that point. And one of the folks I talked to, I remember him saying, no, actually, most people who are justice involved kind of care about procedure, and they care about, okay, fine, I was doing something wrong. You caught me, you arrested me. It is what it is, but treat me like a human being, right? Treat me like my life matters. And so that is also one of the things that stood out to me, right? It wasn't a bunch of people speaking from an absence of knowledge about what it's like to interact with police officers, or absent an expectation of how they ought to be treated. This felt like it was a bridge too far for all the people who we spoke to.
Yeah, it's not bitterness. It's, just an accurate description of how people are feeling being treated.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Right. And so at this point, prosecutors want to use these cases at Chauvin's trial and other examples where he didn't actually use excessive force. What are prosecutors saying so far, and how important is this to their overall case?
Yeah, I can't speak on how important it is to their case. I can say that a number of these individuals are on the witness list, so there is a potential that they will be called. What I can also say is that the federal judge in this case, Judge Cahill, has rejected the majority of the cases that prosecutors had raised. They're allowing 2 cases to be entered into evidence in this matter, and they've rejected the majority of them, or the judge has rejected the majority of them. And so, I think that's one of the reasons why this story also felt, if you could say, gratifying to publish, is that the jury in this case is unlikely to hear many of the stories that we told.
Right.
But the public will be able to hear what folks have to say about it.
Yeah.
Right. And then on the other side, Chauvin's lawyers don't want the cases introduced. The court is limiting the number of cases, like you said. How standard is that? And what, if anything, does that say about the defense that we think they're going to mount?
Yeah, that is kind of standard defense attorney practice, right? You will more or less come up with motions to try to get every piece of evidence that prosecutors try to enter thrown out for one reason or another. So I wouldn't read too far into it. I think I would just say that the defense's explanation for why all of those cases should be thrown out or not included, I think, do probably offer some kind of preview of what we will hear in the overall defense, which is basically that as an officer, Derek Chauvin in particular, but officers in general, need to gain compliance of uncompliant people, and he did so according to his training. Right, that's what you see in all of their responses to why those cases should not have been included, and I think that is the bottom line defense that we will hear in this case.
Right. And then from the actual overall Minneapolis Police Department, have they responded at all to this reporting or to criticism that they didn't adequately address Chauvin's behavior this entire time?
I'm not aware of any acknowledgement of this reporting or any response to this reporting. Obviously, the department fired him, and
right.
So you could call that an acknowledgement, I guess, on some level. But no, I mean, there was no acknowledgement, certainly in their formal systems, that any of these incidents had raised any flags, right? So.
Yeah. And, how do you indict a culture, right? It's like a police culture. But I do want to talk a little bit about reporting on criminal justice, because it is incredibly intense. We appreciate you doing it. But it's especially intense when it comes to news about racial violence against people that look like you and me. So how do you handle that? And how are you handling that right now? Has it changed for you in the past year? What's sort of like, your vibe?
I wouldn't say it's changed. I mean, I guess one thing I'll say is I think of it because I get asked this question a lot by, just by friends and people and acquaintances. And I think a lot of times I almost have to, I think of it in the sense of like a forensic pathologist or even a surgeon or something, right? Like there's a degree to which when you are exposed to something over and over again, you become desensitized to it. Maybe it doesn't mean that you don't have any emotional connection to it, but it becomes pretty normal. I started in this industry working on a project called The Counted, tracking every person killed by the police in 2015 and 2016. That was my first day of work. It's like, here's the coffee machine, here's the passcode to get into the bathroom, and here's 600 names of people who were killed by the police. We need you to go read all the news articles about them and decipher the details and put them into a spreadsheet. So, I certainly remember in those early moments of working on that project, there'd be, just like sitting on the subway riding home after 8 hours of doing that. Just like, I don't know if I have like the stamina to process and internalize this for 40 hours a week. But it does become kind of normal to be connected to these moments. And I think another observation that I have from doing that work, we're essentially for 2 years paying some attention at least to every single police killing, is that it's really somewhat random which cases perforate the national attention and lead to these, if you could call them reckonings or moments of collective national attention. There's some rhyme or reason. Certainly the presence of shocking video is a really strong catalyst for that. But there are lots of cases that are similarly egregious to ones that that we all know well, and we've all sort of heard the refrains of say their name, and no one has really said those folks' names.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good point. I mean, all eyes are definitely about to turn to Minneapolis again with the trial coming up. It could be something similar to like what we saw with George Zimmerman or the police officer who shot and killed Philando Castile, So is there anything you're sort of bracing yourself for or thinking about coverage-wise as the trial is getting underway?
No, nothing in particular. I think it's kind of we'll take it as it comes kind of moment and situation. There's going to be a lot of attention on Minneapolis, both on the sort of the intricate details of what's being discussed in the courtroom, but I think in a broader sense, there'll be a lot of attention on public safety and attention on protest, demonstration, the bracing for a decision or a non-decision. I think we've all become kind of well accustomed to that rhythm of, there's a trial and then there's a moment where we wait and then we get a decision. And, so I think this is going to be like similar trials in the past, but probably kind of supercharged in a way because this case, again, has galvanized attention in a way that no prior case really ever had.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and to that point, sort of the idea of this possibly standing for something bigger in the country and around the world, what, if any, kind of precedent would be set in the state or around the country by the result in this trial in either direction?
That's a really good question. The simple answer is none. Like conceptually, a single police officer being convicted of a police killing doesn't really set, like it's happened before. It happened in the Walter Scott case. The officer Michael Slager accepted a plea deal on federal charges. It didn't change the landscape. It's happened before in other cases. It didn't change the landscape. Like the overwhelming fact remains that the system as it's currently designed is not designed to hold police criminally accountable for killing people while on duty. Like that's just the structure of it, for better or worse. I'd break it down like this. This was a case that did not divide public sentiment in the ways that other cases have, right? You had very strong law and order, quote unquote, voices sort of arguing that what happened to George Floyd was a tragedy and horrific and shouldn't have happened, and police officers shouldn't behave this way. So if there is a conviction, this case will be seen as an aberration, and it will be sort of pulled into this narrative of a few bad apples, right? That it'll be the system works, that when a police officer does something really egregious, we hold them accountable as a society. So that's proof that the system works. If he's acquitted, then it just sort of falls into a narrative that we're all really familiar with, and it, that police officers generally are not convicted of crimes when they kill people while on duty.
Yeah.
That certainly doesn't change anything.
Yeah. So the solution, can't just come from this case. It's more of a systemic issue.
No, and I think that's, something that I always try to mention in these conversations, right? These individual cases become flashpoints for understandable reasons. And that's just human nature. That's how we kind of understand the world around us, is through anecdotes. Obviously, the whole industry of journalism is basically built around largely about telling stories through anecdote. But, policing is not the story of what one person does to another person, right? Like that's not, if we think of policing in those terms, then we're missing the forest for the trees in a lot of ways that are just much broader and speak not just to police culture. Again, I always think it's important to remember that police operate as agents of a society that we've all built to differing levels of contribution, and they're doing what that society asks them to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So when we look at policing, are there moments of individual police officers acting in ways that are biased or racist or violent or incompetent or any term you want to come up with? Absolutely. I mean that certainly happens. But the broader question of policing is what have we as a society tasked police officers with doing? Mm-hmm. And what is the range of possibilities from really bad to really good within that set of tasks? And that's more or less what we're looking at when we look at the landscape of American policing.
But also, how can we change those parameters, right? I'm really curious because I think, we have these calls for people to defund the police. We want change. People are upset about this particular case. It does reflect on a lot of other police cases. But, do you think that it is possible to change this, or is it a runaway train at this point? Because it's I think a lot of people feel helpless when they see these situations, and it does feel like a one-off until the next one. And so, is there, in your mind, is there a path to stopping the system and this sort of repetitiveness?
It's kind of a yes and no. What I can say over the course of my reporting career is, I've certainly encountered examples of police departments that were really, really bad and got much, much, much better. Now, what the ceiling is, I think, is an open question. And I think there's a lot of folks who are understandably not satisfied with the ceiling as we've come to imagine it, right? I remember back in 2015 reporting on the Philadelphia Police Department and how, after I believe what was a consent decree there, their police killings had gone from some astronomical number to 0 or 1 in a year. But people were still getting beat up by I went there because there was this
they weren't getting murdered, so
there was this viral arrest of 30 how many ever officers beating up a kid basically off of his bike. And so the question that I was there to ask, this is 6 years ago, is just stemming the killings enough, right? So they had done something objectively great, right? They went from killing a lot of people dying at the hands of police to none or one. Yeah. But yet that question still remained. And when I went to the Germantown neighborhood where this happened, and I talked to some of the young black guys who were out hanging out, their attitude was, the police are a gang. They hate us. We hate them. They come here to mess with us. And that's the nature of the situation. So I'm not saying that that's every community's relationship with their police and not every black community's relationship with their police.
Right.
Literally just today, I was talking to some young people in Cleveland about their relationship with the police. And they said something that I've heard often in black communities, which is basically, yeah, there's good ones and there's bad ones, and the good ones are cool, and I really wish they'd do something about the bad ones. That was the overwhelming attitude that I heard. So I don't mean to paint it as there's only one dynamic here, but
Right.
I think that's a roundabout way of answering your question of, can it be fixed? And I just think the answer is,
What are we trying to fix exactly? And
yeah, I think you have to define the terms. Like the police departments can run much, much better than they do. That's obviously empirically true. Like there's plenty of examples that we can point to of departments that have gotten worse or that have gotten better or gotten worse, right? So the quality of policing that communities receive can change. I think the question that remains open is, can the project of policing be fundamentally reimagined? And can you do it not just in a academic way where a bunch of city council people and professors get together and say, hey, here's what we're going to do. Can you do it in such a way that you actually recruit 10 or 100 or 1,000 human beings who are willing to take on that job and do that job? And I think that's the question that we have not really answered in America yet. Like Camden, New Jersey is often cited as an example of doing that. And I think it's a good example for some reasons and a not so good example for other reasons. I mean, they prove that on an administrative level, you can take a department and shut it down and start it from scratch. That's meaningful in that sense. But can you change who wants to be police officers and why, and what the nature of that interaction with communities looks like? Again, to me, that question remains unanswered, and I hope we'll keep doing the work to answer it.
Well, you've given us a ton to think about, and this has been a really great conversation. Really appreciate it. Jamiles, thank you so much for being on our show today.
I really appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.